you.
So,
it's my, it may not be a finger gesture, unless you're really late. So it's my pleasure to introduce Bill Schneider. He's going to talk about bridging the environment gap using first principles-based modeling methods. Bill?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all, and thank you for coming to the first talk this morning. So I'm going to tell you some work that we've been doing that's motivated by interest in oxidation analysis. And you might say, why oxidation? Well, there are practical reasons to be interested in this chemistry. So this is oxidizing to NO2. And it's a reaction that's important in remediating oxidation from things like diesel engines, burnt gas engines, and so on and so forth. So that's a practical motivation. There's another more fundamental reason why I like this chemistry, and it's shown schematically in this graph here. When you look at what's done in oxidation catalysis theory work, a lot is focused on seal oxidation. And seal oxidation is a highly exothermic reaction that has a large intrinsic barrier to it, and that's convenient for some reasons in terms of modeling the experiment. NO oxidation is very different in that the reaction is only slightly exothermic, so it's closer to equilibrium control. And because of this, it's a much more sensitive probe of the oxidation ability of the catalyst. And I'll try to make that clear as I go through my talk where that becomes apparent. So, as I say, NO oxidation only slightly exothermic. That means the reaction is equilibrium limited over conditions in which you typically run the catalysis. It's typically run under conditions of a high excess of oxygen, a high oxygen chemical potential, in order to drive the reaction forward. So at low temperatures, the reaction favors products. At higher temperatures, it's going to favor reactions. Platinum is the most common NO oxidation catalyst. It's used commercially for that. And platinum supported on alumina and other oxides. It's observed that the turnover frequency actually goes up as the catalyst particle sizes decrease. And in fact, low surface, if you get to look at very low surface areas, single crystals, they have very high activity for NO oxidation. So for a modeler like me, that's a nice thing. That means I can unapologetically model this chemistry on the simplest surface model, which is platinum 111. So what we do are supercell density functional theory calculations of this chemistry. These are pictures of the models, the types of slabs that we use, and the types of absorption sites and neighboring types that we're going to have to pay attention to as we model this chemistry. Okay, so I said that NO oxidation is performed under high oxygen concentration conditions. That means the surface tends to be dominated by oxygen. One of the first things we did in studying this chemistry was to go back and look at the coverage-dependent absorption of oxygen on a platinum surface, platinum 111. So this plot is a formation energy plot of basically platinum absorption on 111. If you look at this plot, there are certain kinks in it. Those kinks correspond to the certain ordered coverages of oxygen on the surface that are observed experimentally, by 2, quarter monolayer, half monolayer, and so forth. Other things that are buried inside here are that the oxygen atoms always prefer to bind on FCC sites. They interact repulsively, so they always like to order in such a way that they're as far apart from one another as possible. All right, so what does this have to do with NO oxidation, or how can we set it related to NO oxidation? Well, if you screw up your eyes a little bit in that previous plot, and what you see is it has kind of a quadratic behavior to it. And that's characteristic of the fact that these adsorbates are interacting pairwise repulsively. And so if you fit those points in the lowest energy hull to a quadratic and differentiate it, what you get is a differential absorption energy, or really the chemical potential of oxygen on that platinum surface as a function of coverage. In other words, at very low coverage, the binding energy of oxygen on the surface is quite high. It's around here. As the coverage goes up, the binding energy, the energy that differentially add another oxygen decreases. All right, so now if you're going to do NO oxidation catalysis, you've got to be able to exothermically absorb O2 on the surface. That means you have to have a binding energy that's below that line. If you're going to do NO oxidation, you also have to be able to exothermically remove an oxygen from the surface. We know what the ONO bond energy is, and and I told you that that's a small number, it's about 0.6 volts, that means that I have to bind oxygen weaker than what's shown by this green line here. So if I'm going to do NO oxidation on this surface, I have to do it in this bond energy region. That means I've got to do it somewhere in this coverage region. In other words, this metal will not do NO oxidation down here at low coverage because it's going to hold oxygen to finite. It's got to happen at this finite coverage region. So now we want to build kinetic models of this reaction. That means we've got to look at the rates of the relevant reactions in this coverage region. One other thing I want to show on here. Here's the corresponding line for CO oxidation. You can see it's basically off the bottom of the chart. That's what I mean. CO is not selective, at least towards this particular surface. It'll pull oxygen off anywhere on here. NO is much more selective for the oxidation activity. All right, so we did that. We went and looked using bonding image nudge elastic band calculations at the dissociation barriers for the different types of processes we expect to be important on the surface. One obvious one is O2 dissociation. So I think I have a couple movies here that are going to show this is O2 dissociation on a pristine surface with no oxygen coverage. These are done in large supercells. This is at a quarter monolayer. You see that the oxygen dissociation follows a common path in the two cases, and that the barrier goes up rather precipitously as the oxygen coverage goes up. Or another way to say it is that the barrier goes up as the binding energy of the oxygen decreases. So as you get above, say, a quarter monolayer, it becomes very difficult to dissociate O2. The rates of O2 dissociation go down very rapidly based on this as a function of coverage. Because I'll show you in a second that's consistent with the experiment. Now, the other things you have to do NO oxidation is combine NO molecules and oxygen atoms. And so we can look at the pathways for this also as a function of coverage. And here's another movie. This is at one particular coverage. This is at a quarter monolayer. And what you see, if we look down here, is that the barriers to the reaction go up much more modestly with coverage. And there's a good reason for that, as you can kind of see here. This reaction involves an oxygen atom that always wants to be in an FCC site. To move it away is always going to cost a lot of energy. But the NO has a lot more conformational flexibility to it. So it's much less sensitive to where it absorbs at the surface. The transition state can adapt to the coverage to keep the total the barrier low. Again, because of the fact that the NO is more flexible to where it sits at the surface. So we expect the rate of this reaction, either running forward or backward, to be much less sensitive. To coverage. And in fact, that's what's seen. What's that? All right, then maybe I will. This is consistent with experiments. Fabio Ribeiro and Andy Smelt and a number of other people went and did some experiments at light source in California, as a matter of fact, here, looking at the relative rates of O2 dissociation and NO2 dissociation at a platinum surface. And what the results show is that indeed this reaction, this NO2-NO reaction, maintains its rate at higher coverages than the O2 dissociation. The O2 dissociation reaction basically shuts off once the oxygen coverage hits about half the monolayer, whereas the NO2-NO reaction remains fast on a higher coverage. So that's a nice confirmation of what the DMT calculations. All right, so. Now, so now we have a really good understanding of coverage-dependent oxygen binding on this surface. We want to build a whole NO oxidation model. And so what we need to do is figure out the coverage-dependent absorption energies and rates of all the other processes. And all this shows is that we can go and calculate such things. We can look at NO binding, O2 binding, O2 binding, whatever we want. Look at those as a function of coverage. You can see that everything binds more weakly to the surface as the total coverage of the surface goes up. That's not too surprising. You can also see that there's very nice correlations between the binding energy of any particular sorbate and the binding energy of oxygen. So that's a correlation that we can take advantage of when we create kinetic models. The slopes of those lines are different. And again, that's an important point. That's this point that certain of the molecules, and particularly the ones that contain nitrogen, are less sensitive to coverage because their conformation is more flexible. The ones that involve only oxygen have very steep slopes. All right, so we can take this information and put it into a kinetic model. What we do is write down the reactions that we think are relevant. We can parameterize, I just showed you, the energetics of every reaction against the coverage of oxygen. In models, we correlate the activation energies against coverage, and then solve the model to determine whatever we want about the balances. There was one point I'm going to make in here, and that is that you'll see for a couple of these reactions, there's two different lines. And two different sets of parameters. The reason that is that the standard DFT models, I mean the GGAs, grossly exaggerate the exothermicity of the NO to NO2 reaction. They say that the GGA says that the equilibrium rise to products far more than it really does. And that makes lots and lots of problems when you try to model this kinetically. So we have to put an empirical correction into the model to fix that so that we get the right equilibrium behavior and we get realistic coverages at the condition in which the components exist. All right, so we go and solve these models, and I just want to point out a few things that we see. We get turnover frequencies that are in reasonable agreement with what's seen experimentally. When you first admit that any quantitative agreement is as much buck as anything. The coverages that we see are somewhere between a quarter to around 4/10 of a monolayer. It's a little less than what's seen experimentally, but I'd argue within the uncertainties of the models and the experiments are good agreement. This NO-NO2 reaction we find to be essentially reversible, or essentially be equilibrated under catalytic conditions. So this reaction is controlling the oxygen coverage. This reaction is rapid at all conditions. O2 dissociation is rate limited. And that's also verified by looking at the degree of rate control. All right, so that's great. We've now shown that we understand how platinum does this NO oxidation, and now we'd like to make better catalysts, and so we go and use some reasonable assumptions and calculate the rates over other materials, so gold, platinum, or iridium. What you find is that the same is true on all these materials. The catalysis happens at finite coverage, and if you look at the rates, you'll see that the rates on these are all virtually identical. They differ by maybe a factor 2, factor 4. So what that's telling us is that the material that we use doesn't even matter in terms of the rate of catalysis. How can that be? What's going on? Well, we can understand this by what I've said to this point. This is a graph similar to what I showed you before for the coverage-dependent binding energy of oxygen on platinum, except now we've gone and done all the same calculations for all the metals, all the late transition metals. You see that they all scale linearly, they have different intercepts, they have different slopes. Those are the types of details that John Kitchen will explain later today. But so, remember what I've said is that this reaction, this NO-NO2 reaction, is at equilibrium. And so once you tell me what the conversion of the reaction is, what the ratio of NO2 to NO is, you basically set a coverage and you set where I am on this horizontal axis. You set what the oxygen chemical potential is. Well, if you set the oxygen chemical potential, you set the oxygen binding energy, you set the coverage, and from this VEP relationship, this fact that the O2 dissociation rate scales with the binding energy, you set the rate of O2 dissociation. So this is an example of a reaction where the conditions determine the reaction rate. As long as I'm comparing to the same conditions, I'm always going to get essentially the same rate, modulo a little bit difference in coverage. So then you say, why platinum? Why not choose something cheap? Well, there's a very good reason to choose platinum. If you look at these lines, they're dotted for some reason and then they become solid. The dotted region is the region in which chemisorphed oxygen is stable on this surface. The transition from the dotted to the solid is the point where the surface becomes unstable to bulk oxidation. And platinum is one of the few metals that is actually stable to bulk oxidation in the window in which the catalysis is happening. Things like copper, palladium, iridium, anything else is going to become a bulk oxide before it gets into this. Why big particles of platinum? Well, it's basically the same idea. These type of elements, the same idea. It's because small particles of platinum are going to oxidize very easily. These are obviously sub-nanometer size, but if we do DFT calculations on the oxidation energies of really tiny platinum particles, you find that they always oxidize more readily than so we, platinum 111, the bulk platinum big particles are simply so that they can resist oxidation under the highly oxidizing conditions of the catalysis. How many for time? 4 more minutes. Okay, so I'll put one more slide and then I'll stop. What I've discussed you here is a mean field microkinetic model for NO oxidation. The model does really well in describing a lot of things about the catalysis and describing a lot of trends. It does terribly, catastrophically bad for some genes. The predicted apparent activation energy is not what it should be. The action orders are not what they should be. And there are good reasons why that's the case. This mean field model essentially assumes that in any particular coverage, every site that's on the surface is the same, and that the concentration of those sites is basically random. And those assumptions are not true. I've shown you that oxygen atoms actually interact with one another at the surface. They repel because of electronics and because of sterics. So the locations of these sites are correlated with one another, and the sites are heterogeneous. So if we're going to get rate orders and apparent activation energies right, we have to go beyond the mean field towards something that looks more like a kinetic model, or maybe something. And that's where we're headed. All right, so I want to acknowledge the people who did this work, in particular Rachel Kevin, who just graduated a few weeks ago. We have the postdoc for question. Fabulous work on this. Support from ES, the National Science Foundation, especially collaborations with Andy Smeltz, who's in the audience, and Fabio Rivero, and Podcast. Good resources. So thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Bill. Any questions? I'll start it off.
All right.
Somebody else jumps in. You made your final conclusion about essentially being you need to avoid bulk oxidation of your metal. Was that all reliant on this being equilibrium reaction? So if you went to CO oxidation, could you still make the same arguments, or are you in some
No. I think that CO oxidation would be very different because, again, CO is a good reductant. It will happily reduce the oxide as well as reduce the surface. Now, there may be differences in rates of reduction at the oxide as at the chemisorph surface, but there's not the same. So if we look at the binding energy of oxygen on the oxide, it's just too great for the oxide to be reduced by NO. That's basically the problem.
All right, one more.
Wow, I'm ahead of time.
So, we started a little bit. You talked, at the very beginning, you talked about O2 dissociation, a little thing on your side saying it's a spin forbidden. But you calculated O2 dissociation barriers. And I understand very fully in the gas phase, you thought about an O2 molecule dissociating from a triplet state to a singlet state.
Right.
It's spin forbidden, the spin flip's going to greatly affect the rate.
Right.
But I've never gotten a good answer, a good understanding of what that means on a metal surface, where your O2, where your spin is essentially coupled into a D-band, you've got a reservoir,
Right.
spin up and spin down. Do you think about that? Do you match experiments without it? Do you put it into the calculation in some way?
Right, so this is, so that the logic would be that once the oxygen molecule becomes interacting electronically with the D states of the metal, that you lose that spin polarization. It gets lost in the sea of D states. Now, for the purposes of the type of modeling we do here, I think that's fine. I think that the reality is that there probably are subtle electronic effects that appear. So if you're scattering an O2 molecule on the surface, that you have to take into account. But everything that we did is non-spin polarized, and we tested this. So we start from O2 molecules that are physisorbed, and they're non-spin polarized even at that point.
Yeah.
I'd like to follow up on that. So your Baylor and Matthias Scheffler were looking at oxygen dissociation on aluminum explicitly at this spin flip. And
Right.
the problem is that you get the barrier wrong. But you get the barrier wrong anyway. And you think that the getting it wrong either way just works out in these correlations because the trend remains the same and it's a systematic error.
I suspect, well, of course, aluminum is not a D metal, so that's going to be different from platinum. But yeah, I think you're right as well, that the barriers on the transition state, any error that you're making in the transition state is going to scale away when you look at these coverage effects. So I think that's right. I mean, we're not going to get the absolute barrier right in any case. And the point, again, is that the essential argument is that the O2 barrier is substantially higher than this NO plus O barrier, which is a non-spin forbidden reaction.
Are there any further questions for Bill? Let's thank Bill one more time.